Welcome to today's Back to the City. I'm very excited to have Andrew Baschyn in today, right ahead of two shows. So tomorrow, Friday, March 8th at the Red Sea, is the event called Kinetic Spring.
Yep.
Yeah, the main attraction there is Neil Landstrumm from Edinburgh in the UK.
Right.
Also, the following night in Chicago, there'll be a lot of the same acts performing. So besides Neil, there's also you, DJ ESP Woody McBride, Paul Birkin, Compressor, and Derek Specs. We'll spend most of our time focusing on tomorrow's event at the Red Sea, but we'll certainly also focus a bit on your history, because you are the guy behind Symphony of Brotherhood, and you've been promoting those events since back in 1998.
Yeah, 98.
Yep, and we'll focus a little bit, just briefly, on the Autonomous record, which thank you very much, just gifted me the double CD of. This began with a City Pages ad. You were looking for the guitarist,
yeah.
And then that led to Shane Kramer.
Yep, the guitar.
Joining.
Yeah.
Is this the same Shane Kramer who's presently a DJ?
He's on the Current now.
Right, exactly, yeah. My friend Shane, yeah, it's the same Shane Kramer.
He does a lot of transmission
music, yeah. And often DJs at Dusty's.
Yes, and does a lot of the yacht rock stuff.
Yeah, totally, yeah. So he's quite versatile. He does Bond-themed DJ nights.
Yeah, even musically, he was a guitar player to begin with, and then he kind of flipped back and forth to bass. He's just all around a fantastic human being and a talented artist.
That's my very strong impression. I was hoping that it was the same Shane Kramer. I thought it was likely.
Yeah, I mean, we're already going back there, but I've known Shane since 97.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to a podcast. It was episode 300 of Art Music Technology podcast.
That one grows, yeah.
Yeah. I was hearing on there about how you have the duplex back at like 26 in Lindale, and
behind the record store.
Behind the record store, yeah, exactly, yeah. And once you had Shane involved as a guitarist, eventually that's how you were kind of auditioning different vocalists, and eventually Bobby's, the reason why you guys went with Bobby is because the voice couldn't be buried.
Yeah, me and Shane met in the fall of 97, and we were hoping to go more of the curve, slow dive, My Bloody Valentine with drum machines and samplers. And then when we reconvened after the holiday in the beginning of 98, or 96 we started, so 97, beginning of 97, we put an ad in City Pages, and we were running, I think like that interview said, like, we were running females like every 15 minutes. And it was the weirdest thing to think that back in the day, you just show up at a house and you audition. And, you know, there was kind of a little bit of back and forth. Bobby had more of a pop sound, and we couldn't bury it, but I'm like, it's what we need, because it's the chemistry, and it was really the stories that she could tell with her voice. And I think a lot of the early 90s, mid 90s shoegaze stuff,
like My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah, but like they kind of get pushed into the back, and so that was like, well, it's not going to work with her. We need to kind of come out more. And at that point, trip hop had already kind of been a thing, so then that's kind of when we kind of like, all right, let's just try this and see what happens.
Andrew Broder's on here as well. There's a whole...
Yeah.
It sounds like a really important kind of landmark.
Yeah, because me and Shane had already started a little bit of, you know, the foundation, and then Bobby came in the beginning of 97, and then in all of 97, I tell people I don't do a lot of things right in life, but that start was the right thing I could possibly have, you know, I couldn't know that it was going to be perfectly lined up with how you should probably do it. All of 97 we recorded, and Bobby, bless her soul, sat in the closet with the SM58 and sang, and then in 98 we started playing live in January. So we spent a year recording.
Using it, some of it, Tascam 644 4-track?
Yep, just a 4-track.
Yep.
Just a 4-track.
I was hearing about how you'd have to bend to that to then open up a couple of tracks for the voice and for harmonies.
So it's kind of like we joke about, me and Paul talk about how we just committed things to DAT without even thinking about it. And it was just kind of the lucky, happy accidents that, like, okay, in those days, you just move on in the moment. You don't really think about the future. So like if you have, I guess, decent intuition, you kind of realize after a while you don't have to really think about it. As long as you're not redlining anything. And I was so new to the whole thing, we just kind of kept going.
And you're working even back then already with the Emulator 3 EMU?
Correct. Yeah.
If I understand correctly, like part of that being on your radar was the Depeche Mode. Depeche Mode were associated with it using the...
Yeah, because I grew up in the Chicago area in the 80s. So then I started seeing them in, I think, 97 for Black Celebration. And then I'd seen them, they'd pass through Chicago twice a year. So they'd pass through in the summer to play like an outdoor amphitheater, and they'd pass through in the fall. So from Black Celebration on, I'd probably catch them 2 times a tour. But they always had EMAXs on stage, so I kind of knew the EMU name. Even though I didn't really know at the time, I'd be working with EMU Systems equipment, but it was kind of the joke. If it's good enough for Depeche Mode, it's good enough for me.
Right.
So then when I started, now we're going to jump back into Chicago. So then when I started in 1990, I started in Chicago just out of the South Loop. And the reason why I picked that studio, because there wasn't schools yet for sound production. So then I noticed in their ad, they said they had an EMU Emulator 3. So I figured, well, I guess that's a good place to start, because I had no idea what I was going to do. And then I would just go in there, this teenage kid, and work with the engineer. And sometimes I kind of wonder, what did they even think of this kid coming in here, spending hundreds of dollars and just walking out with a DAT tape? Because I couldn't afford to keep going back, so I'd go every couple of months.
Save up, go in.
Save up, go in, save up, go in. And then I'm like, why am I spending $500 a weekend in the studio when I should just try to buy my own Emulator 3? So then GAN Music financed me on the Emulator 3, which people forget, like there wasn't computers yet. So it was kind of like a computer and a sampler in one. And, it's like $10,000. And it literally hung out the back of my CRX. I mean, it was like people thought I was crazy. And then shortly after I got that, I moved to Wyzetta, and I was like, oh no, I don't even know how to use this thing on my own.
How did you figure out how to use it?
One of my friends I was hanging out with, her friend was dating a dear friend of mine to this day, Corey Eishen. Corey Eishen would start coming over, and he was already into the W30 and stuff like from the 80s. So then he kind of helped me navigate through figuring out, this is, the manual's going to help you, but you just got to get in there and just make mistakes. And because it was like, there was no sound in it. So you actually had to put sounds in it to figure out how to make them musical. So that's where it all started.
Will that feature in your set on Friday and Saturday? What equipment are you working with?
Nowadays, I pretty much use the same thing. It's like a sampler and a sequencer, which the Emulator 3 was for me. But nowadays, it's a lot easier to go out with MPCs. So I typically have a MPC 1000 or 2000, and it's kind of about the spontaneity of what they can do for you with your hands, and just kind of keep going.
Everyone, both on Friday and Saturday, let's focus on the Friday and Saturday events for a bit, are performing live PA, bringing all these people together, live PA under one roof. PA is personal appearance, public address. Which of those two?
I don't know, that's kind of one of those weird terms that kind of goes, it's subjective to whatever you want it to be, but it kind of goes back to like the hip hop days where it's like, if you're live, you're live. And then it kind of, I think, my understanding is it means that it kind of separated the DJs from the people who bring out gear. So the live PA is like, who's going to lug out the gear and the sound system and put on a show. So I think that's kind of where I kind of think I could be wrong. I kind of think it's kind of an early New York kind of thing where it'd be like, okay, now that there's a sound system there's MCs and it's now a live PA. So that's kind of what I think a lot of people are getting into, is like more hardware-based artists working with DJs.
In venues that are traditionally associated with DJs, in this instance, like the Red Sea.
Right. And that's kind of what people are wanting more, is like, even though venues have nice sound systems, like venues like the Red Sea, you know, obviously we need more sound for this. So we, you know, got a turbo sound system coming in as well, because it's all about the bass and having the room tuned, you know, perfectly for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Because with a lot of hardware, people forget, with a lot of hardware, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in that moment. So I think it's stressful for some people, but I think at the end of the day, that's what makes the live PAs a little bit more interesting, because you're never going to hear that show the same way, because it's just all whatever happens, happens.
Well, let's showcase a few of the other acts and then shift our attention to Neil Landstrumm. So Woody McBride is also performing, American techno and acid icon DJ, ESP, aka Woody McBride. I was reading a bio on the RA website for Woody, and the phrase hard psychedelic tribal dance music was used in that context. Could you expand a bit more on Woody and what we can expect from Woody's set?
Woody is actually DJing, so he'll be going on right before Landstrumm. So he'll probably, I have a feeling he's probably going to be showcasing his 3 decades of music. I could be wrong, you know, but you know, people, you know, remember Woody from the early rave days, where he would really take people to another place, because he was the master of the 303, the acids, you know, stuff. And again, people forget, like, you had to buy that stuff and bring it out. And I think that's where Woody, you know, has gotten his respect over the years. It's like, you look back at those early raves and those early scenes that, you know, you had to have extremely good intuition, because those machines are easy to work with, but when there's chaos going on with the sound and the lights and the people, and it's just, it's a lot to keep track of. And Woody's always been, you know, a spot on with that. Could
you say a little bit about the other acts besides Neil, before then we shift our attention to Neil?
Well, Paul Birkin came out around the same time as Woody. So he, you know, he actually started in the end of the 80s, because he was more into computers and sequencing. And I think he and Woody kind of came out of the same rave scene. And that's kind of what Minneapolis kind of has, as far as what I would consider the originators were, like Freddie Fresh. I mean, he has the jump on us, because he started in 85. But then when he started, you know, making, you know, music with gear and hardware, you know, him and Woody, you know, would work together, or, you know, showcase each other's work, or help each other out in the studio, or learning gear. Because people forget, like, a lot of the times when you work with people, it's like, I'll help you, like, because it's a lot to learn. So,
like Corey, for example.
Yeah, like Corey. It's like, but I think, you know, with Woody, Paul, and Fred, is like, you know, they were, you know, always doing more techno-based stuff, or big beat, or acid. And I guess I was kind of on the other end, where I was more mellow and ambient and trip-hop-ish, if anything. Because there was, like, guitars in our stuff. So even though, actually, Autonomous's very first show was actually at a rave, but it was just kind of weird that it was, I could kind of tell that my music didn't necessarily fit.
So Shane Kramer's there playing guitar at a rave.
It was a warehouse, so I don't know. I mean, it's
at a venue that where one would normally
because I took the Emulator 3 out, but the joke's on the audience, because, like, it was the DAT machine was doing the work. But Shane, I think Shane was there. That was probably, I think that was in the summer of '97. And then I was like, that's when I pulled back. I was like, we don't really fit in that culture, because we're not stomping 4/4 all night. Because when you have a vocalist, and I think we all realized with the 90s, it was real easy to get real cheesy real quick. So then if there's too much vocal or too much, you know, to think about, you know, I kind of tell people dance music it's interesting, but sometimes when you want to put a whole song on thought process that you want people to get out of the song, sometimes vocals kind of become intrusive, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. So how did the group Autonomous kind of navigate that and then find the right venues to play in, also ending up with Andrew Broder and others being involved? So could you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because we decided to play New Band Night in January of '98.
Mm-hmm. At First Avenue?
Yeah, in the entry, because back then New Band Night was Tuesday nights in the entry. So Shane had left at that point, but we were still using a lot of his material because I would sample the material or manipulate it. Mm-hmm. So Shane was out of Autonomous at that point, and someone else came in to try to fill his shoes, which I was really hard on everyone because it's Shane had a sound. Mm-hmm. And I feel bad looking back that people tried to mimic his sound and copy him because they're probably trying to please us. Mm-hmm. And that it was already stacked against whoever was coming through the door because, like, Shane was one of a kind. Mm-hmm. So then we reluctantly agreed to do New Band Night. And I think Shane came back for that show. Huh. And then I'm like, that's it. I don't want to do this again. And then Rich Best, the manager of First Avenue, called and said, we've never seen that many people on a Tuesday night. Do you want to come back? And I said, I don't know. I don't think so. But let me think about it. And then I'm like, all my friends are doing music, like more like, spoken word was big back then. Like, so then, working with a lot of those artists and just a lot of, weird artists that like eccentric artists, because it was never dance music or club music or indie music. Mm-hmm. And then I said, well, I'll do it, but I want to book the whole night. And I was kind of like, who does this guy think he is? They're probably thinking.
You wanted to curate it, determine the whole bill.
So then that was the very first time Symphony of Brotherhood came out. People in Chicago made a bunch of these big posters. The entry put them up.
That was the genesis, was it, of Symphony of Brotherhood?
Yeah. So the very next time Autonomous played, a month later in February, it was a Symphony of Brotherhood show, and again the same thing: a couple DJs, a couple live artists. And then Jennifer Donham came down, because I guess people forget back before the internet, people would talk. Mm. So then all of a sudden people were talking about this weird band with a female vocalist and beats and guitar. And it was like this weird project, but people were tuning into it. And then Jennifer Donham came to that show, and she had the Groove Garden scene at the front by Ground Zero. On Wednesday nights, and then she had the Caboose on Sunday nights. But then she was in the process of moving the Sunday night to the 400 bar.
Okay.
So she goes, do you guys want to play the Groove Garden nights? I was like, sure. And then that's how it all started. I tell people to this day, Jennifer Donham is so important to so many people in this town. Her Groove Garden scene cultivated, we wouldn't have John Keston or Happy Apple, or they even intertwined with Rhyme Sayers. Mm-hmm. Because she had a Saturday night show on KFAI called Groove Garden. Mm-hmm. So then when we started playing Groove Garden shows, we had access to all the good R&B people and hip-hop people, and that's where I met a young Andrew Broder. Mm-hmm. Because Andrew Broder was just a kid. And
on the turntables?
Yeah, on the turntables. And he was just such a wicked person on the tables, and we were getting ready to take a break from playing live and actually record the album, and he came in and did some scratch work, and then it was just like, I tell people it was such a great time to be in the scene, because you could go to the front on Wednesday nights, you'd see everyone. You could go to the 400 bar on Sunday nights, you could see everyone. You go to 2 for 1 at First Avenue on Tuesday nights, you could see everyone. So everyone kind of was out. Hey, you want to do this? Hey, do you want to do that? Do you want to play this show? We'll play this show. Do you want to play this show?
What a rich ecosystem.
Yeah, and it was. I tell people, like, it's an old man talking, but you really had to be present, or you wouldn't get those connections.
Right.
By the end of that year, we were already in the main room, because Jennifer Donham kind of plucked us out of the, we didn't know what we were doing yet, but playing Jennifer shows, we got more confidence and we would fit with like, you know, a couple Rhymesayers artists we'd play with. You know, I mean, I remember I remember Idea and Abilities would come to the shows on Sunday nights, and they were just kids. They were just kids. And even Andrew Broder was still a teenager at that point. Because we were still in our, you know, mid-20s at that point. So, but it was just weird that people forget, you know, Jennifer Donham was so important to the, you know, R&B and electronic and hip-hop scene that sometimes people forget that it was really her personality and her charisma and her chemistry that people would come on her show, do this, do that. Because we were a very strange band that we all of a sudden started headlining right away. So then we played the 400 bar on Saturday nights, and after sound check, I'm just going to go across the street and hang out with Jennifer Donham at KFAI. She's like, oh, come on up. And like, but that was the fun thing about being the promoter. I'd never liked being on stage, but I liked being able to get things organized.
But Symphony of Brotherhood was kind of spawned by Autonomous.
Right.
The event on Friday is a Symphony of Brotherhood event.
Right.
Yeah. How did it evolve in the meantime? Can you just tell the story of Symphony of Brotherhood a little?
I think well, obviously the name came from the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech, you know, and when I decided I kind of wanted to, if I have to play live, I kind of want to be a jerk, and I'm like, I kind of want to do it on my terms because I don't particularly like to be on stage. So I kind of got my enjoyment and fulfillment out of being the guy that can bring other people along. Because as soon as we came out, we were playing Friday nights or Saturday night shows, and if you think about it, those are coveted nights in Minneapolis. So then it was a chance to get all the other people around us on the bill because it would always be a Symphony of Brotherhood show. So then First Avenue and the 400 bar, even the Fine Line, and even, you know, some of the other venues that were around, they trusted that they were solid nights and they were always diverse and inclusive. Because you could get indie rock, hip hop, a couple house DJs in between, you know, teardowns, and then an electronic band to take over the remaining hour of the night. And that's kind of what was important to me and everyone around me, was that you could get a lot of people from different backgrounds in their taste of music in the same venue for 5 hours before there were phones to be distracted by. And that's where Symphony of Brotherhood kind of came from, where it's inclusive and diverse. And that kind of always held true to, like, the shows have to be inclusive and diverse because there's so many other crews out there nowadays. And remember, there was a 10-year gap. You know, when I moved back to Chicago, I mean, I was more in the studio work at that point.
You had a studio just down the street from Sears Tower?
Yep, so on Lake and Wells. So, I mean, I was just more into the studio, you know, mode in Chicago. I left Minneapolis in 2003, and I wouldn't come back until 2008. But then I wouldn't bring Symphony of Brotherhood back until 2014.
Okay.
Because nobody was really putting the electronic shows together with the modular artists and the DJs. So then that brought Symphony of Brotherhood back in 2014.
What was the catalyst for its return in 2014?
Brian Benteen was getting married, and his wife asked if me and Faith, my violin player, because I've been working with Faith since 2008. Like when I moved back in 2008, I met Faith shortly after, and we're still, you know, thick as thieves. And I'd go to Spring Street on Thursday nights because Shannon Blowtorch and DJ So Supreme would do Thursday nights at Spring Street.
I love that Shannon Blowtorch is involved in the story of its return. Shannon's going to be the guest in a couple of weeks.
And one night I walked downstairs. I know there was a basement there, and I saw Venus and Vox and Mock Fox in the basement.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where did this place even come from? And then Mock Fox is like, oh, hey, Andrew, I was just cleaning my house. I found some Autonomous CDs in a crate. I'm like, nobody has those things. It goes, oh, no, I found them. And I'm like, so then basically, long story short, Brian and Shauna were getting married, and she's like, can you get Club Underground for our after party? And then they double booked the night. So then it didn't happen. So then as a consolation, they said, well, come back and do a Thursday. And at that point, there wasn't a lot of organization as far as the modular artists or the live artists at that point. So then Symphony Brotherhood came back on Thursday nights into Club Underground. And then I made the mistake of moving it to the Fine Line. And when it gets the bigger events and the bigger rooms, it kind of becomes a bigger job, and I have a job. So that's when I'm like, let's kind of, you know, slow things down, because when you're working with the Fine Line, you got people in the bathroom, the bartenders, the people. It's not just about the artist; it's business. And I kind of realized that some of the underground electronic music just simply didn't work in that room. And it's not the Fine Line's problem; or fault. It was just there's just a certain place where electronic music and live, you know, artists kind of work. And it's kind of more like the smaller the venues for the people that I book, it seems to be a lot less stressful and more of like a camaraderie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'd done that. I mean, I had done, you know, with Jennifer Donham's model, you know, in years before, like, you know, First Ave let me book all 3 rooms. And that was, you know, 25 years ago still, but that was still an amazing feat to get, you know, 800 people in the First Avenue on a Wednesday night.
Right.
And most people had never even heard of the artists that were playing.
And a coherent experience across all the rooms. You've curated it all. It's got the Symphony of Brotherhood ethos across the board.
I got a little bit of fallout for that, because people are like, why are you playing both rooms? Because I think City Pages like might have done a little jab at, like, it's like Live Aid. Autonomous is playing both rooms. And I was like, I'm not going to defend myself, but at the end of the day, the main room was 18 and up, and the entry was 21 and up. So even though you could go back and forth, and the record room,
not everyone could go back.
The record room was 21 and up too, because they had the record room at the time. So that's why I said, well, Autonomous will play the main room, but I put us on first. We didn't headline the main room. Like, you know, let's just get us out of the way.
Right.
Because Alexander East pretty much headlined the main room with his Sonic Boom of Love, which is his live house band, house music band.
House music band, yeah, yeah.
So, and it was great to get him in there and get him the credit and the audience, because he is by far one of the most important people that have come out of the Minneapolis electronic music scene. And sometimes I don't think people understand how important he is, because he's like the Stevie Wonder of house music. He plays all the instruments. He's a phenomenal singer, and he's just an awesome producer. And obviously he's a great DJ. So then that's kind of where, again, if you're the promoter, you can kind of pick and choose what rooms are going to work well with the artist. So it's kind of interesting, even though Autonomous was headlining at the same time in the entry that night, we couldn't see each other's show because we were on at the same time. But that was because Anomaly, Jason Heinrichs, his project was in there too, and it was just a lot of you know, interesting dynamics that you can still get all these new people who no one had ever even heard of, and they like put them in the main room because, you know, you
were trusted,
right? Well, not only that, I think we would rather just kind of, I hate to say it, we'd like not be so stressed out in the entry. Like, because Anomaly and Autonomous would play the entry, and then Sonic Boom of Love would headline the main room, but then all these other up-and-coming artists would get a chance to be in the main room. Because then people could just walk back and forth, and, you know, record room, the entry, I'm like, oh, we'll stay in the main room for a while and see these new up-and-coming kids. I remember kids had their PCs on stage with a monitor, because computers in '98 weren't all that common on stage yet. But that's when I kind of knew that the music scene was changing in Minneapolis, where it wasn't an elitist thing anymore. If you have a PC, you can make electronic music, versus the Woodies, the Birkins, the Freddie Freshes, and the Alexander East and myself. You know, we started so much earlier, but we had to buy everything.
So let's fast forward to August 18th, 2022, and you plant the seeds then for Neil Landstrumm. So
the Neil Landstrumm show came to me at Kinetic Christmas a couple months ago. Raul, who's Compressor, you know, messaged me on Facebook about something, and it was the week before Kinetic. And Christmas, Kinetic Christmas.
Which is your annual
charity event. Yeah. You know, we're getting ready for that show. And then Raul messaged me. I'm like, Raul, where have you been? Because he played up here in 19, right before the pandemic. He was up here. And because Christine Holberg, Paul Birkin, Compressor, and myself, that was the same lineup that we did in 19. Literally a week before the show, you know, Raul, I said, I'll play. So then it was perfect because all of us hadn't, it's the same lineup as we did in 19. So it was important that that little, you know, brotherhood was there. And then he said to me at the end of the day, you know, hey, we need to talk about a future show. I'm bringing Neil Landstrumm to Chicago in the spring. And then I said, what do you think about piggybacking a Minneapolis show? And then he said, well, let me talk to Derek, because Derek Specs is, you know, a big promoter in Chicago. He goes, let me talk to Derek and see what we can do as far as a venue. Raul's like, I love Minneapolis. I'm like, okay. I'm like, let's just make it happen. And Raul goes, well, remember, once people find out he's going to be here, Detroit's going to want him. I'm like, no. Let's get him to Minneapolis. The business is send the deposit.
Thank you for making it happen.
Yeah, so then that's how it all started, because it was all about Raul, and the idea is like, well, I love Minneapolis, so let's do a show in Chicago and then mirror that show in Minneapolis. It was so important to get that so quick because, you know, Neil's only going to be here for a couple days. Because we thought we could get more shows for him, but then he has to go back.
So I was listening to an interview again through the RA website that Neil conducted, and discovering a lot about the Sativa label. John Stewart had a flat in Edinburgh, and a lot of those guys were all based there, living together in that flat, and people from Chicago would come over and they would like host them in the flats, like Claude Young, he was saying, for example.
Yeah, the people like forget that, like, you know, Chicago, obviously when you have O'Hare, it's a lot easier to fly and cheaper. So then a lot of people, you know, forget that it's a lot easier to get over there once you're in a major city. Like even find out, you know, Freddie Fresh would go back to the UK all the time because, you know, there's always been, as you know, there's always been this fascination with American music. And then like everything else, everybody kind of puts their spin on it. So that's kind of what I think Chicago's always had, where, you know, you can take the house music, you know, vibe, but I think most people who know electronic music and DJ culture know it was actually the UK that made the model what it is today. And it comes down to one venue, the Hacienda.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because the Hacienda was, I think, from my understanding, I think the Hacienda was the first time the DJ was celebrated and kind of put in, you know, eyesight of, we know venues where they're up in the rafters, you don't even see the DJ. And I think it was the Hacienda that kind of reformatted how we consume electronic music. And, you know, say what you will about, you know, the back and forth, and, you know, even the I Was There When on there's a YouTube called I Was There When house music documentary, and they even talk about going back and forth to England all the time from Chicago, because, you know, it came from Chicago, but the UK really did kind of put its spin on it.
Yeah. In the interview that I was listening to, Neil was saying that the distinct sound that he and those guys were developing, like in that flat, when they were living in that flat, was harder, faster, and funkier. There was some jazz sampling as well. What's your sense of what the distinct sound, you know, back in the 90s that those guys, particularly Neil, were developing?
Well, I think what people, you know, forget that, like, back in those days, since there weren't computers readily available to handle the audio, you really had to know your samplers. Like, I think they were into Akai's, like the S, you know, 3000 or 3000 XL, or the EMU stuff. And I think what people forget is, since there's such limited space in those samplers, that they would just, you know, take snippets of here and there. And then I think people forget that, like, the UK was so ahead of the American electronic music production culture because they were using Atari computers for sequencers. Because the sequencers are just telling the machines what to do. The machines are doing the heavy lifting. But a lot of the drum and bass and jungle, even to this day, a lot of purists still use the, Amigas and the Commodores because that's just kind of how they sequence. So I think with a lot of artists like Landstrumm and those people, I could be wrong, but I think a lot of the heavy lifting was like just finding a snippet that made sense and then building around it. So, and I think in those days, that's kind of what a lot of people did, was people kind of forget about the sampling lifestyle was not necessarily ripping off people. It was just continuing the vibe. The repetitiveness.
He went on to rewire grime and dubstep with the UK hardcore tradition. Is that an aspect?
I might be the wrong guy to ask. I never really got into dubstep.
Okay.
So I definitely not the guy to ask that. But I think when people, have worked with machines and know that they're like a part of their like limbs, I think you kind of outgrow what you're used to or what your comfortable is. And I think people like Landstrumm, they always embrace and go forward. And a lot of electronic artists don't necessarily do that. They kind of stick to what is comfortable to them. And like when certain artists, like even DJ Shadow or like, DJ Crush, it's like, when they kind of move forward and people like, they don't sound like themselves anymore. I'm like, well, what are we supposed to do as electronic artists? We can't keep doing the same thing. If technology comes out or something else comes out and we want to embrace it, I think sometimes a lot of people forget that electronic producers, they get growing pains too. I mean, machines can only get you so far. So if something new comes out and it inspires you, or, a different genre comes out and it inspires you, I think a lot of people sometimes don't like it when people move into that direction. They kind of want them to stay where they are. And I think that that's kind of frustrating for some producers of any kind of genre of music, where you have to keep evolving, or what's the point of doing it? So I think like people like Neil Landstrumm, when they take on new genres or new spin on something, it's because, it makes sense to them.
Yeah. The Brown by August record, is that kind of the sound that people might... He was saying in this interview that for a long time, that was the sound on that Brown by August record is what he was associated with. And then as he was evolving beyond and doing something different, it was like agitating for him.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the Moving Shadow label, the early drum and bass label. It's like, it's the same thing. A lot of people just, use the Office, because the Offices back then were probably someone's flat with a bunch of gear in there. And, Moving Shadows label, that is kind of the same thing where, the people that really worked hard at making that sound, it makes sense that they would go off and Goldie would find them. And then with Goldie's stuff, and he even admits it, a lot of the sound really did come from the people that were on Moving Shadow at the time. It's like, so it's the same thing. Just because a sound or a style comes from a label, it's kind of like the old days where, like Wax Trax or 4AD or, Beggar's Banquet, certain labels have a sound, or Network Records back in the Skinny Puppy and Severed Heads days and Chris and Cozy. It's like, when you look at an album cover, it's going to have a certain sound. It's the same thing with I think records and vinyl. It's like when you see that die cut label, you're going to expect something that you're going to like.
You were saying about it probably being like the studio probably being someone's flat. There was this particular flat in Brunswick Square that a lot of this was happening in. I was like hearing in the interview. No Future. Are you familiar with that aspect of his work?
Yeah, that's what I think. What people forget, and it needs to be important to remember, is like a lot of the scenes, a lot of the labels that had come out in the 80s and 90s. It's because who had the equipment, and then that's why people would come and work with equipment, and then they would be like, well, let's just start pressing our own records. because technology wasn't that available until the 2000s, where it's like, if someone's got all this gear, we have a sound, let's start pressing records. And I think that's where the model comes from with, even present day labels. If there's a certain sound or a certain group of people that are still making the sound, like Modern Life Records is the new label that's coming out. And it's like Baschyn and, myself and some other people that, even though we kind of have a sound, I think nowadays labels are more of a library or like a catalog. Because we don't really need record labels anymore, because you can all do it yourself. But there is something, I think, and I truly believe, that there's kind of safety in numbers. So, so we've been really hard at, working really hard at getting the timeline together for releasing records, because Modern Life Records is coming out probably in about 6 months.
Okay.
And that's pretty much going to be a quarterly vinyl label.
Okay.
Where, me and Baschyn are bringing back the zine culture with it. So you get like, we all have lives and, jobs and this and that, but we kind of sat down and thought about, with Modern Life Records, what is Modern Life Records? What would a Modern Life record label be nowadays? Because we don't need labels anymore. But you kind of do need a library or, a crew. So then when Paul agreed to be a part of it, we kind of realized that we don't need to showcase our past. We can just showcase the future. And Paul's such a zine fan that, he was just over 2 nights ago with his daughter, and his daughter had a play date with my dog. So it was like boys in here, dog and daughter in there. It was fantastic. And he brought all these old zines over he had done.
Old cultures.
Yeah. And it was just like, that's kind of like what we decided. It's like, if Modern Life Records is going to enter the arena, let's stick true to releasing actual records, but let's see what else we can do with a zine. And Paul's really into the pay for play with a lot of the Bitcoin labels that are coming out. And I tell Paul to this day, it's like, we see each other every couple of weeks, walking the dog and coffee, but people forget that, there's a lot out there that you can get distracted by. So when you have a couple people around you who are really passionate about things, like Paul's really into like, Wave Lake and, certain Bitcoin record labels that are coming out. I know nothing about it. And because I don't do a crypto, but he's really follows that closely. And about a month ago, there's like some artist playing the main room, I think. And it was like people in real time, you could see people donating in real time Bitcoin while they're performing. And I had no idea this culture is going on. But Paul's really into that. So it's like, if Modern Life Records is going to be a record label like the old school days, maybe we should try to experiment with, the Bitcoin aspect of consuming and pay for play.
What is your sense then of the future of Modern Life Records and culture, the zine?
I think that, you and I sitting here, I think humans in general always want a story.
Yeah.
And I think that, when there's so much distortion and white noise out there with technology and too much information in your pocket at all times, I think sometimes you just want to slow down, put a record on, look at a magazine. It's kind of like, I remember when Songs of Faith and Devotion came out for Depeche Mode, you'd literally go to the record store at midnight because you could buy it at midnight. Because back in the day, you had to wait till midnight because it's Tuesday. And I remember I came home and I was reading, I think, an article of David Gahan was being interviewed in Details, and just sitting down with putting that record on, and then reading an article in Details with an interview with David Gahan. It's like you can just kind of sit there and disappear in the music in the background and read a story with it. Yeah,
and that narrative component.
Yeah,
grounds it and gives it meaning.
I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of really good things with labels, and there's a lot of good music out there. But at the end of the day, I think when you get into the point of, 40s and, early 50s, it's like, what else do you want to get out of this? And I think that's when you kind of look at your, surroundings. I'm like, who else is still doing this now? And I think when you have like Woody and Freddie and Alexander East and Paul Berkin and myself, that when you think about the early 90s here, you know, we're still doing it, and we don't really do it for ego or financial gain. We just do it because it's a part of us.
Absolutely.
And I think that's when you kind of realize, if that's the case, what else should we do with this journey of music? I think that's where Modern Life Records is coming into the arena, where let's do a zine, let's release a couple records a year, let's do some shows, because you know how the world figures it out.
Do you have plans for, do you know, which venue you'll be?
I don't know. I mean, that's going to be a hard one, because even when I asked Neil Landstrumm, because I was kind of cautious, I'm like, just so you know, we're going to record the Red Sea, because me and Paul and Raul are going to, be on a compilation for a vinyl in December. Would you mind being a part of this? Because I don't really know Neil.
That's Kinetic Christmas, of course.
Yeah. So the Kinetic Christmas show in December, there's actually going to be vinyl coming out from what's being recorded tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And I was kind of wondering, and then Neil said yes, because I was surprised that he would say yes, because he probably doesn't even really know the model yet. But I think that he must know Paul quite well, so it made sense that I'm like, okay, we got Neil on. He's going to be doing a Modern Life Records release, so I'm like, there you go. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better group of people to slowly, I tell people, like, there's so much going on. We haven't released a single record yet, but there's just so much you're building up to. You just can't. You only get one first impression.
And for people who are not familiar with Neil, there is a recent live at House of God, Birmingham. And there's a link to that on the event page, isn't there? So people can hear a recent live set from, I think, October 27th, 2023.
Yeah, Boiler Room one. Yeah. So then, because I would really like to get him to Chicago, because Symphony of Brotherhood is doing more in this summer with bringing shows into Chicago. So, because since I'm kind of from Chicago, and I've been here for 30 years, I tell people I get dual citizenship. Because I'm always back there, and I still have a lot of friends doing great things with music. So it's like, I think what the model of Symphony of Brotherhood is, I'm working with a couple of people now for other venues that we can kind of bring that model and start bringing Minneapolis artists to Chicago. And the next Symphony of Brotherhood show is May 4th. And then we're bringing all the iHeart Techno people up for that show. So now we're crossing, state lines. I'm like, all right, let's get the whole iHeart Techno crew up here.
Very cool. Is that Red Sea also?
Yeah, I think we'll do Red Sea again.
Cool.
So, because Chicago, Minneapolis, we kind of are, like, we think about the Midwest, Kansas City and Omaha are cool, but when you look at the big picture, it's just like there's a lot going on in these two cities.
Totally, yeah. Speaking of venues, one of the venues that Neil Landstrumm plays most regularly is Fabric, which is my favorite venue in London, and my jacket's from there. And
so has it always been at the same location?
Yeah, it used to be a meat packing location. That's what the original purpose of that venue was. Okay. And Fabric's always been there. So I used to go there as a teenager, and then I recently, a few months ago, went back to London.
I'm glad they preserved. So is it in a part of town that it can be preserved, or are they coming up around it? Like, how all cities build, and because obviously the Hacienda's long gone.
Right. Yes.
I mean, do you think they're safe where they are?
I think that they're safe where they are. Something that was new since a couple of decades back when I used to go there is that everyone who worked there had T-shirts that said "Don't be a creep," and so although some of the same guys who would want to be there to be a creep were there, it was like their wings had been cut, and they were kind of stupidly unaware of how the venue had transformed around them to take their power away, and how intentional. This is something that I love about the electronic music scene here.
There's a lot of accountability.
Absolutely. And intentionality, and like, these are the rules by which one must abide, and if one doesn't abide by those rules, then one gets removed from the context.
Right. Well, I mean, people forget that, you know, in the 80s and 90s, you know, a lot of females would go to gay bars so they wouldn't have to deal with it.
Totally.
And, you know, it's, you know, people forget just because you're feeling good and dancing doesn't necessarily mean you want to be approached.
Totally.
And I think that that's, you know, a lot of that, you know, consciousness had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, because because people always want to be around excitement, and there's something about, you know, strobing lights and bass and, you know, and movement that's always been, probably since the dawn of man, that's been, you know, exciting.
Yeah, one can let go and lose oneself to it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, you know, it's kind of primitive, but it's just kind of like, we forget, like, we're animals.
Oh, yeah.
But I think I think a lot of that had to happen because, especially with everyone, I think the best thing about the current state of technology is, like, everyone's accountable because someone's going to snap it or video it.
Mm-hmm. As the new events that you organize come to be, will like that same like intentionality and the accountability component, are there ways in which you can consciously kind of foreground that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, I tend to book the same people a lot because it really is, there really is a sense of community, and this, people forget Minneapolis really isn't that big when it comes down to the scenes. You know, there's separate little pockets here and there, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm not really big in the techno scene. You know, I've never really been a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I know a lot of the artists that make it. Obviously, some of my, you know, the people closely around me would be considered techno, but I think those types of venues and those type of events, you know, I've never really gravitated towards them. But I do know when it kind of comes down to that, you know, side of the spectrum of music, you know, they are very accountable, and they, you know, they all know each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there anything else that you would particularly like to highlight about Friday and Saturday's events that we haven't covered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, you know, I mean, it's going to be I can't believe it's going to be at the Red Sea. Everyone's like, that's so much going on in the Red Sea, but
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a good time.
That was my thought too.
Yeah, because I wasn't expecting Woody, because I don't know if I should say this. I literally reached out and like, do you want a guest list spot +1? And he's like, sure. I'm like, would you want to play an hour before Neil? And I woke up the next day and I got a yes. And it's not very often that, like, I look at my phone a couple of times and I'm like, what? Well,
that was late February, the addition of Woody.
Yeah, actually, it was just a little over a week ago.
Right, before the filming of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was literally like, cause I was on the phone with Freddie talking about something, and it's how the universe works. You know,
Mm-hmm.
You know, Woody came up as far as, you know, because they all came up together at the same time, and
yeah,
you know, so it's just then I'm like, you know, because I had Woody at the Fine Line in 15.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the better shows. That it was like E-Tones and me and Faith and Woody, and that typically wouldn't be, because me and Faith's music a little bit more down tempo. Like, we don't make dance music.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting to think that you could get that kind of weird eclectic thing into the Fine Line, because, you know, we're not national acts. I mean, Woody is, but it was just like, you know, to see Woody and, you know, Tony E-Tones, who's still one of the best DJs and one of the best human beings in Minneapolis, to see them on the same bill, mm-hmm. and to see them interact quietly across the room, it was just like, that's when you have one of those moments, just like, this is what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because they particularly don't do a lot sometimes. You know, people forget that, you know, a lot of these people just kind of, they're so busy.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited about everything that you've been sharing about what's coming together. Beyond tomorrow's event at the Red Sea and then the sister event in Chicago, I would be very excited to have you and
the crew
return sometime to expand more on
Absolutely
on what's coming up in the future.
Yep,
So,
I ran that past all of them, and I think Woody and Freddie and Paul, I think we kind of said that their stories behind the electronic scene, because people forget there weren't a lot of people that could make it because the technology wasn't there yet. So it's not necessarily about the rave culture or the techno culture or the techno scene. It's just like we're all just electronic music artists when it comes at the end of the day, we're just electronic music producers. And we're still doing it, which
with a lot of stories to tell. And we've already covered the value of those stories is something that was at the heart of this conversation
and
too.
Believe me, if that were to happen, it would be like I would just want to sit and listen to them.
Absolutely,
because they have got so much history and so much releases behind them. I mean, it's just amazing that people forget. When I talk to people all around the world, people know Woody and Freddie. I mean, Birkin's plays Trésor, and Birkin's the kind of guy that will quietly go play London or Paris or Berlin, and he's got it mastered where he'll take a Friday off, play, come back, get the time change, and go back to work on Monday. And he joked about that one time where people will talk about and Paul's such a genuine human being. He is one of my favorite people, but he's just like, I put a box of chocolates and they probably don't realize it was in my carry-on. But he's just such a humble guy, and he's just a very, very genuine person. And I think people forget that there's personalities and there's history behind the people that still do this, because it's not an ego thing or a money thing. It's just kind of who we are.
Absolutely.
And people forget that.
Yeah. Well, watch this space. We'll try and make that happen.
Yes.
Thank you for the idea. It will be an honor to try and make that happen. In the meantime, one last time, the Red Sea is where it's going down tomorrow night. What time does the event begin? 8 p.m.
8. So
it's likely to be well attended.
Yeah,
so
I'm a little bit worried. But
yes.
I think we'll be all right.
I think so too.
So
cool. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to joining you there tomorrow. This has been a wonderful conversation.
You gonna road trip with us to Chicago?
I have to work the next day. So
the funny thing is, we don't even know where it is. I mean, the Chicago.
Yes, I saw that.
The Chicago event is still, even though we're playing tomorrow night.
Yeah.
We still don't know where it is.
TBA.
Which I'm assuming it's just going to be a ton of sound in a warehouse like the good old days.
Yeah.
So it'll definitely be. That should be interesting. We'll have to talk about that next time.
Absolutely, yeah. So, end of part 1. Looking forward to having you back in the future. Thanks so much for coming in today, Fred.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. This has been Back to the City. I'm Simon Calder. We'll be back next Thursday at 10 p.m. In the meantime, see you tomorrow, everyone, at the Red Sea.